My name is Charles Middleton. I'm MD of Triodos in the UK. We are Bristol's very own ethical bank, and much more importantly, we have no state funding, and we never have done and never will do any subprime lending, just to get that absolutely straight. Just want to welcome our three speakers. We have Clare Dakin, who is the founder of Tree Sisters. We have Solitaire Townsend, who is the co-founder of Futerra. And we have Ed Mayo, who is currently Secretary General for the Co-operative UK movement. Each of them will speak. There'll then be time for a discussion and some questions from the floor, and we will finish at 7:30. So I hope that fits with your expectations. So I'd first of all like to introduce Clare, who is going to come down, I think, onto the floor in a moment. Clare describes herself as a passionate environmentalist, a social entrepreneur, and she brings 18 years of international experience facilitating, coaching, and creating change processes to support lasting shifts in behaviour. Sounds very appropriate for our topic this evening. She worked for 3 years as the UK coordinator of a very large agroforestry initiative in India called Project Green Hands, before she then set up Tree Sisters, whose strategy is based around 5 choices that we can bring into our lives. And they are consideration, encouragement, intimacy, responsibility, and courage, which sounds to me like a fantastic template for doing good stuff. And finally, she sees climate change as a perfect excuse to get radical. Clare, thank you.
Feels very apt to be in the warts and all section of the Schumacher, because as far as I can make out, the behaviour change issue is a large bunch of warts, and my talk is very much a U-shape. We'll start in the world of possibility, we'll drop into the world of warts, and then we'll come back out into the world of possibility again. So if you get utterly depressed halfway through, I promise you we are going to come back out and into the world of sunshine. It's endlessly surprising for me to end up doing things like this. I never expected this in my life. I was always very interested in why we are the way we are and what needs to happen in order for change to naturally happen. I didn't think it would get to the scale of looking at climate change, but that is really the big ticket issue that we're facing and the one that we're struggling the hardest to come to terms with. It started for me with a car crash and a message that came in the car crash, which was about the experiment, and I wondered what the experiment was, and what I received crashing into a tree was that humanity is running out of time, but that it's not over yet. But it's going to take all of us rising to the challenge, and that's the behaviour change aspect. All of us rising to the challenge to get through. And that the single biggest challenge facing us is fear of failure. And the way to get over fear of failure is to call everything you do an experiment, because you can't fail an experiment, you can only learn. The experiment I got at that crash was to reforest the tropics within 10 years, which I went into acute denial about for about a year before thinking, well, someone's got to have a go. Let's join the tribe. Because we need to figure out what needs to happen for people to start living as if the planet matters. Because the planet matters, and we're acting as if it doesn't. And to look at what we're doing to the planet, we have to start by looking at ourselves, because the problem is with us. And this is where the map comes in. 5 choices. It was received in meditation as 5 words, and I just thought, ooh, it's a 5-pointed star, and drew them up. And then I thought, actually, that's a person. Consideration sitting in the head, encouragement sitting in the left arm, intimacy in the left foot, responsibility in the right foot, and courage in the right arm. For those of you that work with energy, generally in the human body, energy comes in through the left side of the body, it crosses on the back of the mouth, and it exits out through the right. We naturally have an in-breath and an out-breath in our bodies. And this map, to me, represents the possibility of a human being, the possibility of what each of us could be. Encouragement being the in-breath of the heart, the part of us that longs for love, the part of us that is relationship-orientated, that cares, that wants to do things together, that collaborates, that is co-creative, that is about community. The left foot being about intimacy. Intimacy with our bodies, it's about pleasure, groundedness, movement, relationship with the natural world. It's our plug-in. It's our sense of who we actually are. It's our willingness to feel. Responsibility being the activity that is then made possible through feeling what is appropriate for us. We feel and then we know what to do. It's right action. How to live. And courage being about the expressive heart, the part of us that wants to operate from a place of purpose. You know, what am I here for? What will give me meaning? What will fulfill me? How to give of our hearts. And in this map, the planet sits at the center, or if this is a woman, the womb sits in the center, because we're looking at how do we live in a way that ensures 7 generations hence, and 7 generations beyond that. How do we live as if life matters? Life has to be at the center of everything that we're doing. So this human being, this possibility of a person who uses their mind not as a dictator, but as a receiver of the whole. How do we bring this thing into balance? How do we get the in-breath of the body functioning and the out-breath of the body functioning? And how do we do it so that our relationships, our physicality, our activity, and our purpose serves life? When you think about this person and how probably all of us aspire to this, I certainly would love to be this open and active, then you think about the systems that this person would create. You know, we'd be living in a world of people who are actually prepared to look at the truth. That's consideration. Let's look at the facts. Let's actually see how things really are. Let's make sure everything is all right for all of us. Encouragement, that's the place of all of us. Not just a few of us getting okay, but actually everybody matters. Intimacy, we operate in ways that make sense to our bodies. Responsibility, we only take actions that serve life. We don't do things that hurt ourselves or the planet. And courage, we would live as people who are committed to giving our fullest, to living with real meaning. So, what I started to see working with this map is that we really are operating from a place of potential balance, you know, the in-breath of ourselves and the out-breath of ourselves. And I started to see this in terms of the roles of the masculine and the feminine. Talking about that within a whole person. That the feminine is the side of us that is receptive. You know, we've got the innie. You know, the receptive side is the feeling heart and the feeling body. So that we can feel how we are in this world. And the masculine side then figures out what to do with that. It's the part of us that wants to put things into systems or structures or build. And that healthy masculine side of us is there to serve the feminine into fullness. So if the feminine is the root system, it's our anchor into the planet, then the masculine side of us figures out how to bring that into abundance. So it really strikes me that the actual possibility of a human being is how to husband life into its fullness. She feels how things are so that he figures out what to do. It's like a perfect balance within each of us. And if we take that to the level of the planet, you're not hearing?
Use the microphone.
Sorry. If we take that to the level of the planet, then the in-breath of the planet is like her renewal cycles, and the out-breath of the planet is what she gives. So in effect, if we were living in a balanced way, then we would only be taking what actually mirrors what she gives. We would be living appropriately within our means rather than burning up the planet. So we want this light world, you know, we want this sustainable world. It's what we're all craving, but as we were starting to work with this map and discover it, sitting on cushions in living rooms, like sitting in all these different positions, figuring out what this was, the shadow of it started to appear. Yes, please. Oh, no. Shadow map. That's the one. Thank you. So it felt really, really important to start to understand that if we're wanting to create something but actually we're not succeeding, then we have to figure out where we're stuck. And essentially where we were stuck is in all the same places. The truth is, there's a large part of us that really doesn't want to change. When confronted with climate change, it just feels totally overwhelming, and we don't know actually how to go about doing it. When it comes to unity, when it comes to togetherness, we can extend a lot of us to our families, to our friends, but beyond that, we don't seem to have the capacity. It gets very difficult when it's those people over there who are in difficulty. When it comes to intimacy, when it comes to really being prepared to feel what's going on, it feels overwhelming. Like, how do you feel the enormity of what's going on in this world? And responsibility, the classic stance is not what we can give to the world, but actually how can we take from this system? How can we make it all right for ourselves? And courage, the place of, what can I give of myself? So many of us are stuck in the place of, how can I bring myself forward? The unworthiness stories really start to kick in. I'm afraid of giving my gifts. I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of what people will say. This is where climate change becomes the excuse to step up, but it's where we sort of freeze. So in effect, it's like saying, I want to create a sustainable world. So it's saying, okay, I'm going to move my tent and I'm going to create this, but we're not looking at the fact that there's an enormous tent peg stuck in the ground over here, which is our resistance to change. And so we keep trying to create it and we keep getting pulled back. And each place on that shadow map are places where we're stuck, that it's places where our energy is actually frozen. Yes, please, back to the pendulum. Thank you. So if you think about a pendulum, if you think that something has to swing in equal amount on either side, you can't sort of start centrally and swing out, then the extent to which we can move into our capacities is also the extent to which we're blocked the other way. So we can only go as far into our joy, in effect, as we can go into our grief. It's like if we're blocked over here, it stops us actually really swinging out into our capacity. And in this case, we're looking at the fact that we really need to stretch. Like, behavior change is going to ask us to move out in a big way beyond our comfort zones, which means we need to be able to have a good run-up. We need to be able to swing right the other way to be able to free up the energy needed to extend ourselves. And that's hard. It's like we don't seem to be able to do it. So to me, there is something stuck on the other side. It's like we don't seem to be able to make that shift over here to be able to get the swing. It's like saying I'm going to go and do long jump but not having a run-up. Something is blocking. And what my interest is in what is in that stuck place, because that's where we need to unfreeze, because if we can unfreeze that, there's the energy needed for change, and that's where the dance between the masculine and the feminine gets really interesting. Because we live in a world that did shift over towards patriarchy. And if you think about the light masculine, the healthy masculine's orientation to serve life, a patriarchal system is one that's actually steering away from the feminine, and the feminine being our capacity to receive and our capacity to feel. The shadow side of that is much more to dominate life rather than to serve. And I don't know why, none of us know why what has happened to women has happened to women, and it's one of these topics that's just so difficult to talk about. But the feminine in all her forms, be it women or the natural world, has been acutely devalued. And my hunch is that in that stuck place, on that side of the pendulum, in our collective psyche, we just need to go back to the witch burnings. We just need to go back to where colossal trauma has happened to the feminine side of our psyche. That has also really impacted men. It's not just women that will have got impacted there with that message that says to feel, to be feminine is so wrong, it's just wrong. And if you think of the feminine as our rooting system, it's like at that time in history, our roots got cut. That's what it feels like. And when we don't have roots, we don't really know who we are. And if we don't know who we are, we start having to trust the external systems, and that is traumatic. It's like we lose ourselves. And I think there is a collective stuck point in there where we stopped rooting ourselves and knowing our place in relationship to life and the planet, and had to start following the dominant system, because the dominant system, unfortunately, is destructive on this planet. And when that circuitry that is required to feel is frozen, then we can watch the dominant system destroying the natural world and not actually feel it enough to be able to respond. So somehow we need to be able to bring this to light and make it accessible and provide ways of dealing with it if we're actually to create the change, like lubricate the change that is asking. No, dominant, that one. Thank you. So what I've been looking at is that the system that we have is actually not set up to call forth our strength. It's actually set up to call forth our weakness. If you think about the place of courage on the map, in the shadow, actually that's the place of war. And if you look at war, that is the ultimate weapon of fear, which is the shadow of courage. And it faces encouragement, which is the place of unity, but war is the tool to break unity. It is the tool of separation, profound separation. But it creates a false sense of security, them and us, or we'll keep them over there. It's all about us and them. And actually what we need is an all of us society, not an us and them society. And the trauma of war, its relationship to intimacy in the left foot, it's like, how do you open and feel when there is that much destruction going on? So we welcome all the tools of mass distraction, you know, shopping and endless texting and computers and whatever else we can do to numb ourselves off because it's just too much to feel. And very handy that in the place of irresponsibility, we've got endless consumerism to fill the void, to fill the great gap that is there because we're not plugged in and we're not feeling. So we can just distract ourselves with endless stuff. And the whole shadow map revolves around money, which instills us with a sense of lack and immediacy to sort out the existing economic crisis. So we can just do that with climate change. We don't need to look at it. You know, short-termism is getting like so blinkered. We are not aware. We're not willing to see what's coming. And we can't feel it. Unfortunately, the only way that a patriarchal, dominant, destructive culture is going to go, or an out-breath culture that is just driving and driving towards growth all the time, is burnout. Without the in-breath, without our capacity to look at our own energy, feel our own energy, feel the planetary energy, look at her resources, we're just going to keep going that way. So, what do we need to do? Reinstate the feminine? Oh, brilliant. To me, if the fundamental wound that we are suffering, that is freezing us, is to do with our breaking of that feminine side of all of our natures, then bringing it back is absolutely crucial. Reinstating the feminine. It means opening up to our bodies, opening up to our hearts, really getting the value of them, the point of them. We're not just here as minds walking around figuring out what we to do to this planet. We're whole systems, living in a living whole system, then we need to be in relationship with it. We need to feel it, be part of it. Because only if you can feel it can you care for it. And if you care for it, then you'll actually have a relationship that leads to natural protection. We need to make the protection of the planet an inevitability, not a slog. It needs to just happen naturally. So somewhere along the line, we need to be able to plant ourselves back in our bodies and feel the stuff that we're not wanting to feel. Defrost that and get that stuck energy that's like this actually moving. You know, Joanna Macy's incredible work, the work that reconnects, you know, like actually dealing with the grief that's there. You know, Brian Swim said, we've yet to deepen our hearts enough to be willing to feel the grief that is asking to be felt. It's like grieving in England, you know, like trying to bring the possibility of grieving. I remember going to a conference in Arizona where Matthew Fox said, you are all mentally ill. There was about 600 of us in the room going, oh, really? You're all mentally ill. That's the only way you can live in this world of ours and watch the destruction and not feel it. Put your foreheads on the ground, put your bottoms in the air and wail, he said. I want to hear you wailing. I want to hear you crying. And we were all just like, you know, I was terribly British. Okay. But actually what happens in that map when you plug into intimacy and you let yourself feel, you really let yourself feel, it's agony. It is agony, but it spits you out either into right action, I have to do something, or into your courage. This is what wants to come through. It's like when you defrost it, it ignites your fire, and that fire is in all of us. It's like we want to do something. We may not know what, because the system that we're living in is doing this to our energies and distracting us and numbing us off all the time. But actually, we're here to serve, and I really believe that if we're here now, it's because we have something to contribute to this turning point in humanity's history. So we learned from this map, basically, that in these flows, if, what's not working in current behavior change things is that we're basically saying, you need to change your behavior, which is going straight from consideration to responsibility. That's just staying on the out breath. Again, you can't ask totally exhausted, stressed out, overwhelmed people to give more. You've got to breathe in first. We've got to do this side, the left side, the feminine side, the resourcing, the nourishing, the plugging in has to come first. So if we unlock intimacy, it unlocks the energy needed to go to responsibility and courage. Okay, I'm willing to do something. Okay, there's something for me to give. If we're stuck in, there's only one of me, I can't face climate change. Oh my God, you've got to be joking, 30 seconds. It's not going to happen, I'll try really hard. If we're stuck there, then basically the togetherness in the unity found in encouragement actually enables us to stand together and face the feeling that has to happen in our bodies, which again takes you around the map. So I'm not going to get a chance at all to tell you about Tree Sisters. So luckily there's a talk coming up about it on Thursday at Hamilton House, but very briefly, this whole addressing of the repressed feminine has been especially personal for women. It just has. There's no other way to look at it. Women's power has been suppressed to the extent that we sit on it. We sit on it a lot. So many of us don't know how to come forward. And yes, all of us are needed in the fight against climate change, but that includes women. That means we have to step up too. So Tree Sisters is in effect like a support system. It's an attempt to create a global network where women can actually support each other to step up. And it's specifically looking at how we can build a crowdfunding network for global reforestation, which is addressing the imbalance again. We're all taking from the planet all the time, but what do we give back? Where are we addressing her renewal cycle? So essentially, we're trying to help women rediscover how to embody the feminine and do something together that is contributing to the rebalancing or the giving back. So the talk is on Thursday at Hamilton House with my partner, Bernadette, who's doing it. And essentially, what we're doing is trying to, I know, she's got the stop sign. We're trying to mobilize both sides. Encouragement to responsibility, that's a network put into action, and courage and intimacy, that is how do you empower a human being to actually make the difference. So on the 1st of July, you've got a flyer on your laps. Basically, there's an Embodying Change workshop, which is our way of introducing this map through the body. The whole thing is about embodiment. The change that needs to happen is through the body. If this map speaks to you, and if you would like to come and actually discover how to embody it and what that change does through you, then please come and join us on the 1st. You'll find us on Facebook. You'll find us on the net. Can we go to the last slide? Last one, thank you. Please do come and find us. The events, all the events for Green Week, the retreats that are coming up, and the embodiment workshop, it's all on there. And lastly, I would just want to say, I apologize for running over. I really do believe that we are wired for balance, and I really believe that we are wired for service. And if we're here, we're here because we have got something to contribute. And that if we can and are willing to face what's stopping us, then we will naturally move towards our highest possibility as individuals and then collectively, and then start to create the systems that actually can bring our highest possibility as humans to the world. And lastly, a quote from a favorite guy of mine, Dan Emmons. It's not about saying a prayer for the earth. It's about becoming the prayer. Thank you.
Claire, thank you so much for getting us off to such an inspiring start with lots of really challenging thoughts and impulses there. So look forward to coming back to that later on. I now want to introduce Solitaire Townsend. Solly co-founded Futerra and through that advises a very diverse range of global brands. So we've got sort of Unilever, Greenpeace, Asda and the UN. And with all of them, she's looking to make green messages great. She is passionate about making sustainability desirable. Such a good word, I think. As she describes it, it's not about selling soap, it's about persuading people to use it in the first place. She's a member of a number of task forces addressing sustainability, and most importantly, she holds master's degrees in Shakespeare studies and sustainable development. A bit weird, her words, not mine. Solly, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a little bit smaller than Claire, so I'm just... There we go. Can you hear me? Slightly shorter. Brilliant. This is a joy following that. Thank you so much, Claire. That was extraordinary. And I feel like I'm going to be taking you from the sublime to pretty much the mundane now, because I want to talk about behaviour change on the ground. Actually, how do you get people to do something different? And first of all, I wanted to ask you guys a few questions, just so I can get a sense of who I've got in the room. So, who watched the UK-France Euro 2012 match this evening? Okay. Who is looking forward to the new series of Geordie Shore? Excellent, thank you very much. Who watched most of the series of Britain's Got Talent? Okay, well done, and thank you for your honesty, guys. Who reads The Sun? Who shops at Tesco? Asda? Lidl? Okay, so a few of you. You're all really weird. You're really, really weird. Okay, let's ask the ultimate question. Which of you don't have a television? Oh my God, I'm going. Okay, so job number one, if you're a really, really frustrated environmentalist, if the message of climate change and what's happening out there just makes you want to grab people by the shoulders and go, for God's sake, we're going to lose the farm. And yet you haven't managed to bring about the kind of behaviour change and world change that you want to bring about, it's okay, it's because you're weird. I spend a lot of my time with people like us. In fact, I set up a business with a really, really weird person who doesn't shop, doesn't fly, and spends most of his time thinking about sustainable development. I, however, do watch Geordie Shore and do watch Britain's Got Talent and don't just shop at Asda, but work for Asda as well as for Greenpeace. So it's actually a bit intimidating for me to come here, and the idea of not having a television, I just can't possibly imagine. And that's because I'm partly what's called a gold wedge, whereas a lot of you, although not all of you, are what's called a green wedge. And some of you might be a brick wedge. So I'm going to introduce these to you. If you're aware of Pat Dade's work on values modes, prospectors, settlers and pioneers, you'll recognise it, but I always forget which title's which. So I'm going to use gold, green and brick to introduce you to these types of people. And I'm introducing them to you because I want to talk about how do you change their behaviour. I think what Claire's talking about a little bit is about how do you change who they are. You know, how do you make more people be more like the green wedge? And that is, at the moment, a big debate that I think is happening within our movement. Do you change people or do you change their behaviour? So I'm going to come from the behavioural end, Claire's come from the people end, and I'll leave it to you to decide which of the strategies you want to use, although you'll probably end up trying to use both, because we need every tool that we can get at the moment, and we need it now. So first of all, I'll introduce you to you, because you should recognise this a little bit. So green wedge people are generally big world thinkers. So they're concerned about sea level rise in Bangladesh. They are concerned about poverty levels. They're concerned about big international, big world issues and how they're going to impact people that they might never have met. They're concerned about self-development and self-improvement. They see themselves as a project that they want to work on. Green Wedge people like change, and they forget that that word actually is sometimes a bit of a bad word for some of the rest of the world. They like change. They like self-development. They really, really mistrust anything that's mainstream, corporate, media savvy, glamorous, branded, etc. If you advertised for an event like this on the telly, you guys probably wouldn't have come. In fact, quite a few of you wouldn't have even known it was happening. And they trust networks of people. They trust people who they know. They don't trust sort of the big guys. They like change so much that sometimes it's a bit difficult to count on their behaviour. Because just when a behaviour starts going mainstream and we start getting most of the population to begin to accept it, they've decided it's not actually green enough. So many of them were the first recyclers when recycling was a little bit of a political statement. And now they're the ones who are saying, actually, no, recycling is part of the problem. It's an end-of-pipe strategy. We're sending it all to China. It takes too much. We should just reduce our waste. Some of the Green Wedges who were a bit wealthier were some of the first people to buy hybrid cars and Priuses. And now they're the ones saying, actually, no, hybrids aren't good enough. We need to completely electrify. We need to move on quite quickly. So just when we begin to get the majority of the population to think that something's normal, mainstream, acceptable, once there starts being adverts about it, the Green Wedge automatically start moving on. A few of you might have recognised yourself in that, so I won't spend much more time because you already know who you are. I want to introduce you to the Brick Wedge, because they're quite similar in a way, but the Brick Wedge are very small world thinkers. They care deeply about their local community, their local park, their home, their workplace, their school. They don't really think about things such as sea level rise in Bangladesh. They think about dog poo on the streets and what's happening to my local park and litter. Those are the environmental issues that they care about. Sometimes, although actually Brick Wedge and Green Wedge people come from the same sort of emotional space, they often don't get on very well because the Gold Wedge people are going, how can you be talking about dog poo on the streets when we've got climate change to deal with? Get a sense of perspective. And the Big World people and the Brick Wedge people are saying, how can you be talking about climate change when we can't even deal with litter? So they actually come from the same sort of place, but one of them's Big Wedge and one of them's Small World. And the other thing about the Brick Wedge, the Small World people, is that they don't like change. Change automatically means that things are getting worse. Change is a risk. Change is much more likely to result in something bad than to result in something good. And also they're very driven by sustenance, by being a good homemaker, by being a good provider, by money, by safety and security. Both the Green Wedge and the Brick Wedge are the minority of most populations. The majority of the population are the Gold Wedge. And what the Gold Wedge cares about most is what other people think of them. What the Gold Wedge thinks about most is what other people think of them. Often when I talk to groups of Green Wedges, they don't quite get their head around how incredibly powerful and huge this is as a motivator in our current society, until I point out to them that in surveys of women under 40, 30% of women under 40 either have had, are saving up for, or wish that they could afford plastic surgery. Primarily breast augmentation. Don't look below my neck right now. It's okay, I haven't. So that's a third, almost a third of women. You do not get a boob job in order to be smarter. You don't get a boob job in order to be a better parent. You don't get a boob job in order to make more money. Well, depending what industry you work in. A boob job's all about what other people think of you. Also, we talk a lot about behaviour change, about how difficult it is to get people to change their behaviour, how everything The green behaviours cost too much. They're too difficult. We can't motivate people even to do the small things. Just think for a moment about the money, risk, time, and physical pain involved in having a boob job. People are prepared to do extraordinary things. The gold wedge are prepared to go to extraordinary lengths, make enormous sacrifices in order to get something that they want. Our challenge isn't with the gold wedge that our behaviours are too difficult, too expensive, too hard. Our problem is that our behaviours aren't desirable enough. So the gold wedge are motivated by what other people think of them. Now, most people immediately start going to a demographic here. They start thinking, yeah, green wedge, kind of funky people, you know, brick wedge maybe kind of conservative, Middle England. Oh, gold wedge, that's all kind of, you know, the Jordans and the celebrities. Actually, you can have a 80-year-old green wedge. In fact, the part of London I live in, Brixton, where there's some very challenging environments for people to live in, you get a lot of 14-year-old black lads who are brick wedge. They live in a small world, they care about that world, they don't much care about anything outside of it. And you can have gold wedges in every part of society. In fact, most of our most ambitious and successful individuals, by which I don't just mean celebrities, I also mean politicians and business leaders, are gold wedge. Because for most people, where does ambition come from? It comes from the desire to be thought well of by others. So when we try to use green wedge or brick wedge motivations on these big, important, influential people, we forget that sometimes inviting them to a dinner with Prince Charles is more likely to get them to agree to some major change in their business than by giving them a good business case, because they're motivated by what other people think of them. So, and this works based on the work of Pat Dade that I mentioned before. So this is where I start challenging the warts and all title of what we've been asked to talk about tonight, and start wanting to talk a little bit more about cupcakes and all. So a little bit about how can we make behaviour change a little bit more desirable. So I'm not going to talk about how we motivate the green wedge, because you're already motivated. I don't need to reach you. You're already talking to each other, you're supporting each other, creating transition towns, creating huge online networks, doing the really difficult stuff in the face of a social proof, a world that doesn't accept it. You need support, we need to look after each other, but I don't need to reach any more of the green wedge, at least not in this country. Although in some other countries, actually there's real work to be done even to actually get the green wedge up and going. I'm not going to work on reaching the brick wedge because they're incredibly difficult to reach. Brick wedge trust the people in their own community. So again, that's why things like transition towns actually are quite good, because they get onto the streets talking to people. You couldn't send me to Manchester to go, hello, I'm from London, I'm here to talk to you about the environment. It's especially not to a group of brick wedge. They're not going to trust me, I'm not from their community, they don't know who I am. But reaching the gold wedge, there's some huge behaviour change wins that we can make there. And you guys can make them. So first of all, 3 things not to do, and then I'll talk to you about what to do if you want to reach and change the gold wedge. Be that on a macro, huge global scale, or when talking to your annoying brother-in-law who you've just realised is a gold wedge, and you don't want to have climate change arguments with him anymore. So job number 1, 3 things not to do. First thing not to do, don't hate. Second thing not to do, don't flood with information. Third thing not to do, don't make people afraid. And I'll take them in reverse order. So making people afraid, you're all going to die, unless we change our light bulbs. As the climate change threat gets closer, more present, more urgent, we get louder and louder and louder. And because we weren't loud enough last time, we tried to get a little bit loud this time, even though being loud has never served us well. Even though telling people they're going to burn, fry, flood, drown, starve, get burnt, whatever the particular take on climate change, for example, is, a vision of climate hell Well, if it worked, we already would have this licked, because we've been singing that song for a long time. And in fact, I spend a lot of my time sitting in focus groups and doing surveys with the people who shop at Asda and watch the Euro Championships, and they know. They actually know. They're able to articulate. Most of your fellow Brits, most of your fellow Americans, most people around the world, most of your fellow Brazilians, many, many urban Chinese are able to articulate the threat of climate change. They are not unaware, and they are afraid. And just ramping up that fear and anxiety isn't generating behaviour change. It's just making people more afraid and anxious, which isn't a very nice thing to do to people, because afraid and anxious people get sick more and, in fact, die earlier if they don't feel that there's something they can do about the thing that they're afraid of. And one of the things that we talk a lot with, and Lucy, who's sitting in the front there, used to work with Futerra, what we talk a lot with some of our NGO clients about is running an advert about how you should be terribly afraid and giving a website address to go and find out what to do about it isn't quite balancing out the fear with action. It's leading with the fear and then a little bit of action. So the other thing to do is not to flood with information. Parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, albedo effect, flooding with information. There's just only so much that we can take. You know, the A equals B equals C. If people just educated on climate change, they would do something. Again, we've massively raised education on climate change and awareness of climate change. It hasn't delivered anything. And in fact, if we're going to raise education, we might need to raise people's numeracy and scientific literacy before we hit them with too much more climate change information. And thirdly, hate. There's a lot of hate around not liking the kind of people who are in the gold wedge, and the gold wedge not liking the green wedge, and the green wedge not liking the brick wedge. And remember, if your only way of communicating is to inspire, if your only way of changing behaviour is to inspire behaviour change, unless you're draconian and you can force it, then you're always in an exchange. You're exchanging somebody's attention for your message. So they are gifting you with their attention, just like you're gifting me with yours now, in exchange for their message. Sending out a message of hate means they will simply remove the gift of their attention. And anyone who's sat talking to someone about climate change who's glazing over, even though they're sitting directly in front of you, and has managed to turn off their eyes and ears, irrespective of what you're saying, knows that it's very easy to remove attention. And that's if you lead with anger, hate, dislike, condemnation of the people you're talking to. So, 3 things that work. 1, social proof. We do what the people around us do. We do what the people around us do. If we all stood up now and stood on one leg and jumped and invited somebody else to walk in here, and we all just continued on as if normal, within a second or two they'd be doing this. No idea about why they were doing it, but because we are such social animals, we do what each other do. It's a fantastic evolutionary strategy, which is when everyone else runs, run. When everybody else looks up, look up. It's a way that we work together in societies. So the more people visibly doing things, the more likely it is that others will. And we see this a lot in evidence of recycling, which is once you get 60 to 70% of a street recycling, then you reach the tipping point where everybody else recycles, irrespective of their views on recycling, because they simply fit in with what the social proof is. So you guys can change behaviour by very visibly recycling, cycling to work, not taking bags at till points, thinking about everything that you can do which is visible. If you're making a green home, how are you going to make that green home visible? One of the problems with cavity wall insulation is that no one can see it. So how can you create the social proof? The second big one, which is harder to do, is to create status. So if our gold wedge cares deeply what other people think of them, then if green behaviours detract from status, or if they're even status neutral, you'd have to march them under gunfire to do it. A fantastic piece of work was done in the US in a dormitory, in a university dormitory, and this was a co-ed dorm, so both men and women lived in sort of little flats in this university in the US. And in the basement of the university, there was a laundry. And the laundry was quite disgusting. It was always boiling hot, really humid, very unpleasant. And there was dryers in the laundry. And what they really wanted to do was change behaviours to get people to stop drying their clothes in the dryers in the laundry and hang them out to line instead. Cheaper, more environmentally friendly. The women quite actively began doing this. The men just wouldn't. They kept putting the money in the slot and sitting in the unpleasant laundry. And so they surveyed the men, and the men themselves weren't even aware why they were doing it. They couldn't give a good articulation. So these researchers did something really smart, and they surveyed the women about what did the women think of the men who used the dryers versus hanging on the line. And the women thought that the men who hung their clothes out on the line were probably poorer, less sexually attractive in general, and more likely to be gay. So, your green wedge bloke wouldn't care. He'd go and hang out on the line anyway and say, I'm going to get the girls anyway. Your gold wedge bloke, you literally would have had to tie them to the drying irons to get them to hang things out. And the final thing I wanted to say about raising status is pleasure, leisure, and fulfillment. How can we make desirable, pleasurable, fun, cupcake-like, this is my cupcake theory of behaviour change, how can we make it more like eating a cupcake rather than having warts to do sustainable behaviours? And very quickly, in my last 30 seconds, I will give you a visual example. That's taking a bottle and putting it into a municipal recycling bin. 2 stories. One, oh my God, I've got to take the recycling out. I've got loads and loads and loads of bottles in the bin. Maybe we'll just throw them away and start again. No, I'm a good person. I will take them, Throw them in the back of the car, drive down to the municipal recycling bin. It's really filthy and disgusting and a bit dark. So I jump out, quickly throw them in, got all these filthy plastic bags, not sure what to do with them, stuff them between the recycling bins, get back in the car, drive home, wash my hands, think, oh, I'm a good human being. But that sucked. Story number 2. Mummy, please, can we go to the recycling bins? It's like, oh, we only went yesterday. I don't drink that much wine. Please. It's like, okay, we walk down to the recycling bins. The ground is painted green. The bins are painted white with black splodges on them. And when you open them, they go moo. Same behaviour. But you've turned it from something which is unpleasant to do into a pleasure, leisure and fulfilment activity with a lick of paint and a little moo piece. And this is what Islington Council in London has done. So if you're a green wedge, enjoy the company of green wedges and work to make more people green wedge. But if you want to change the world, then you need to reach the gold wedge and perhaps even those brick wedge people. So thank you very much.
But impossible to sit in and work at the same time. So, for taking us in a slightly different direction, which is great. So we've got 2 different sort of perspectives on this behaviour, warts and all issue. And I want to introduce our third and final speaker, Ed Mayo, currently Secretary General of Cooperatives UK, which I think is the largest leadership movement in the UK. 12.8 million members, is that right, Ed? Yep. Which is the perfect place for what I think would be described as a long-term cooperator. He wants to build a fairer, more sustainable economy, bringing together economic life and social justice. He described himself on LinkedIn as a busy bee, and how busy is this man? His past includes being Chief Executive of the National Consumer Council, Director of the New Economics Foundation, Chair of the fantastic Jubilee 2000 campaign, and part of the team that founded the Fair Trade Mark. I saw him speaking at Tomby Hall about 6 years ago, and all I can remember, I'm afraid, is that one moment he talked about using the carrot and stick, at which point he produced from one pocket a carrot and from the other pocket a stick. Never forgotten it. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to talk about carrots and sticks. I'm going to start off with dogs, and I'm not going to show you any dogs out of my pocket, because it's tough out there, isn't it? The economy is tough. Things are tough. Business is tough. Employment is insecure if you can get a job. Business is competitive. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Except it's not really, is it? Because, has anybody here got dogs? Anybody here got a dog? Does your dog eat other dogs? No. It's a funny old thing that dogs don't eat dogs. Dogs are what biologists would describe as eusocial creatures. So like ants and bees, they actually cooperate to get things done. But that's not what we're told. Actually, we brought up in a world, we live in a world where the messages are, you've got to get ahead to get on, trust nobody, rely on yourself. There's a focus on competition. There's a focus on individualism that fits very well, Claire, with what you were saying. I was looking at you, John. Sorry. Fits very well with what you were saying earlier. And I think there's something in all of these issues around behaviour change, kind of how we live, which is about the individual and the collective, what we do on our own and what we do together. I think there's also something about the truth. I mean, I found myself sort of listening to what you were saying, thinking that actually, fear and hatred have been incredible motivators, for centuries in different contexts. Again, some of the war that Claire was talking about. Clearly, these are motivational factors. There has to be something, whatever tactic we choose, that is also about truth-telling, telling the truth. And it does feel to me as if the world has changed quite dramatically over recent years. That the science and story of climate change, yes, has just got deeper and stronger, if more contested through, kind of corporate lobbyists and the like. But the economy has collapsed. It's quite clear that actually our model of wealth creation does not work. And efforts, whether it's Plan A or Plan B, to restart the economy that in some ways are about kickstarting the old economy that failed, are simply not good enough. So I kind of suspect that there is an openness to think outside of the box, an openness to think more widely. But I was reflecting, as you both spoke earlier, on a very wise man called Woody Allen. And Woody Allen, in one of his early films, included details of a couple of courses that students could attend. And they were a bit like this. The first one was, the sun is a hot ball of gas, massive in scale, that could veer off its trajectory at any moment, hurtling into the earth and causing catastrophe. The average student is advised what they can do in this context. That was one course. Second course was inflation and depression, how to dress for each. And there's something in this which is about the mismatch between issues, social issues around inequality, environmental issues around species loss, climate change, and others, that are almost about a mismatch in scale, as if we could delegate to individual action and individual ways what actually has to be done at a different level. Ulrich Beck, of course, I'm so sorry. Ulrich Beck, who's a German sociologist, says that we are condemned often in a lot of what passes for political and academic discourse today. We're condemned to find biographical solutions to systemic problems. Again, this idea that because we're told we live in a world of individual action, of consumerism, a world of entitlements, where what you do individually can make a difference. It's very empowering, it's very new age in a sense, that actually you're dealing with things where individual action cannot work. We have to work together. And therefore it's in some ways not a new thing. Many of the big issues that we faced in terms of social change over centuries have involved people organising collectively to do things. Women's rights, anti-racism, rights in the workplace, and the labour movement have all involved us getting together. Public health in the 19th century as well, collective action. The difficulties that we face is not that actually we can't do some of this stuff, but that actually the cultural baggage that we get shown and encouraged to believe, which is a set of myths, encourages us to go about it in entirely the wrong way. And actually what we need to do is have a little bit more humility, listen to the truth, and find ways to work together. That seems to me to be a fundamental. Now, I'm going to talk tonight about one example of this, which is in the field of money. Because it seems to me that, as Claire talked about, money was in the centre of your chart. You talked about war distancing, that sense of yourself and the other. I mean, Simone de Beauvoir, in her work on femininity, says you can only understand it in relationship. So it's not about women, it's about women and men, and the ways in which people become the other. And therefore that kind of sense of how you link. Now, money allows a distance to come in, because we put money on the table, we spend money in shops, and you're not part of the economic chain. You don't see, whose hands made your breakfast or the link. So in some ways it allows us to dehumanize what goes on. I think money is one of the most difficult parts. It's been the most difficult part of my kind of life in terms of reconciling your kind of values and your ethics and your money. It's not an easy part. For some it is easy, and I admire them, but I think money is not an easy one. So I'm going to focus in on money, and I'm going to start, if you will, John, with a very short film, which is linked to a new campaign which has been launched this year. It's a campaign which I will invite your participation in, and the campaign is called Move Your Money. Probably breaking some bylaw in showing some of that material, by the way, so please don't tell. The idea of Move Your Money is that this is a simple place to start, because many of the UK population bank with one of the banks that caused the credit crunch in some way, or were bailed out as a result of it. So the idea of moving your account is something simple that you can do to make a difference. And the alternatives are there. Mutual banks in particular, cooperative credit unions are ways of recycling money, that actually money comes in from the people that save with the credit union or the building society and is recycled in the local economy. It doesn't go out, and indeed building societies aren't even allowed to get involved in some of the kind of subprime mortgages that Charles talked about at the beginning. It is an ecological model at its heart. So the alternatives are there. This was a campaign that was started by a woman, Ariana Huffington, in the States, and has been taken up now right across the States with a huge boost to credit unions and kind of local savings mutuals. And that's the campaign which has now been launched here in the UK. It is not a kind of, there's no professional, there's no paid staff. It's a collection of different groups coming together to do this. Some of the core team came out of UK Uncut to do this. So it is a campaign that actually needs ordinary people's participation in order to develop and to grow. Now, some of the facts around current accounts are that it's a kind of well-known saying that people in the UK tend to stay longer with their bank than they do in their marriage. People are less likely to switch current account in the UK than any other country across Europe. But having a current account, the banks, the Office of Fair Trading concluded a year or so ago, don't even compete on price because the inertia is so great. And therefore what you'll get is things like the kind of cuddly cartoon characters, of Lloyd's TSB, to try and convince you that banks are, human scale and cuddly and ethical, when it's absolutely patently clear that they are not, if anything, quite kind of the opposite. So there's a very good reason to start there with current accounts, and that's what the focus is. I'm reminded, Charles, of the of the god Mercury, which was the inspiration and one of the motives behind Triodos in its UK kind of origins, and using that idea of Mercury as a god that would fly between those people who saved, with Triodos in this case, and those people who would borrow. And that idea that a bank could actually be a way of reconnecting people in terms of money, the people who are putting money on deposit in a bank, and then the people that are kind of borrowing it. That kind of relinking and rehumanizing the economy is core to that idea. So I did want to ask, over the last kind of 3 or 5 years, have any of you moved your current account? Fabulous. So green wedge, gold wedge. Gold wedge is well done. Your status is just fabulous. Everybody admires you. Green wedge, whatever you may be, well done. That's it. The facts on moving your account is that it's been made now much easier to do so. It takes 10 days from an application being approved for an account to be moved over, and the bank that takes your account will take responsibility for all of the direct debits and the like. You've got a wealth of choice. I've talked about Triodos, I've talked about credit unions. The Cooperative Bank has been voted by the Financial Times twice as Europe's most sustainable bank as well, and that's merged with the Britannia Building Society, so kind of out and around. Now the question is, for those of you who are currently with one of the kind of big 4 or 5 banks, would you be willing to move your account? And I won't put your hand up for that, but leave you with that thought. You can pledge on the Move Your Money site, and there's plenty of information up there, but also to ask you about asking others to do the same. Can you ask your sisters, brothers, cousins, neighbours, faith colleagues, church groups, or others to get involved in this campaign? I think the Move Your Money campaign will grow, and I think one of the reasons it's exciting is that you have to have the right framing for any campaign. I remember the Jubilee 2000 campaign, which Charles, you talked about, and colleagues here tonight kind of were involved in that as well. Anne Pettifer, who is the kind of energetic woman at the heart of the campaign, Anne described to me when we were putting that campaign together, that you had to look at this big complicated issue of third world debt, countries in Africa paying more to service their debts than spending on the health and education of their children. She had to look at it a bit like a diamond cutter, to have a look at this stone with the diamond in it, and to go around, all the way around to look at it, until you found the right cut, the campaign that could really take off and make a difference. And Jubilee 2000 did that for the very poorest countries in Africa. And I think Move Your Money can do the same. Because one of the lessons of, I think, the fair trade movement has been that because you can't do everything doesn't mean that you shouldn't do something. And there is a beauty to that. And it seems to me that in many ways, Move Your Money can become the new fair trade. Now, that idea of doing things together, what in some work with colleagues, in a program called the Sustainable Consumption Roundtable, we took the theme of I will if you will, the idea of cooperative action, that some of these issues like climate change are so big that you may not be able to do things on your own unless you know that you are doing things with others. And that taking actions can then lead to some of the deeper deliberation about our lifestyles, about the way that we act. Claire's breath in, breath out, a kind of mindfulness to how we operate, so that it's not just about the moo cow recycling, lovely example, but how that can lead on to rethink in a deeper way. And John, if you could just sort of pull up kind of the last 2 slides that I've got. Across the cooperative movement is made up of around 5,000 independent enterprises across the UK that are owned by members. We're not owned by external outside investors, we're owned by members. The Those cooperatives come in many, many different forms, from renewable energy cooperatives, food cooperatives, co-op shops, don't shop in Asda, cooperative banks, credit unions, housing cooperatives, and others. But they share a common set of very strong commitment to values and that idea of kind of member responsibility. The United Nations this year has quite beautifully declared 2012 as the United Nations International Year of Cooperatives. So across the movement, we are celebrating kind of that year. And there's about 12.8 million member owners of cooperatives, as Charles said. So there are more people that are member owners of cooperative businesses than there are individual investors in the stock market. And that's true kind of worldwide, 1.4 million cooperative enterprises. And to support that, actually what we're doing is launching in a couple of weeks a new smartphone app. Now, I do realise if you don't have a television, you may not have a smartphone app. There is a kind of a web version kind of online, but then you will need a computer to use that as well. But my guess is you probably got enough friends to get through. Smartphone apps now kind of around half the mobile phone kind of population is now on our smartphones. And this is an app that is designed to help you turn your mobile phone into an agent for social change. And it does something very simple, which is it links you up wherever you may be with a cooperative or a mutual enterprise close to you. So you can find your nearest co-ops, whether it's a co-op store or a cooperative school, that are growing across the UK, in the UK. So that's a tool to leave you with. I think in summary, this is about finding new ways to remember old lessons about how social change happens, which is about coming together, which is about collective action. It's about remembering the power of cooperation. It's about breaking the myths out there, the idea of a dog-eat-dog world that says that we have to be in competition. I published a book with the Professor of Marketing, Agnes Nairn, that's looking at the environment in which children grow up. And alongside the education curriculum that everyone focuses on, there is another curriculum which is focused by commercial marketing and large companies that encourages that competitive approach. And it sends subtle messages, not just about body image, but also about inequality. Inequality is corrosive. So in order to promote behaviour change, we have to come together. And the good news is that it makes sense to do so. It is, after all, a dog helps dog world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're going to open the floor to questions, and I just want to get a bit of a view, perhaps, on this whole individual-collective question which came up and has been a bit of a theme. So, what's your experience in talking to all these consumer groups about individual versus collective action? I think the green.
Incredibly briefly.
Think of questions while we're doing this.
Because I do think we should open it to the floor. Is this on? Can you hear me? Brilliant.
Yes.
So, social proof is collective action. So the fact that we do what the people around us do is about collective action. I think actually there's a deeper challenge going on at the moment. I don't think anyone actually disagrees about collective action. It's about collective action visually that entices others, and I think fair trade's a beautiful example of a movement that actually did transition from the green wedge to the gold wedge and became something which many people, no matter whether they actually know what fair trade means or not, now participate in. And I really hope that money can follow the same kind of track, that maybe you don't understand how money is invested, you don't necessarily need to be educated, you just want to be part of that gang, which can be a very green wedge. But I do think there's something deeper going on, which is do we change people or do we change behaviours? And I think that is do we change who people are, or do we try to change what they do? Which I think is a little bit of a genuine challenge at the heart of some of this movement at the moment.
Okay. Do you mind if we take some questions? Is that it? Can we go? Okay, so there's a mic on either side. Where is the mic? I don't know where the mic is. Okay, are you going to go one each side? Great, so let's start with the jersey there, with the sort of multicoloured jersey. Next, there, sorry. In a bit. I want to take 3 questions, so, and then we'll deal with them together. Yep, and then we'll go behind you.
Okay, mainly for Solitaire, I guess. But how do you create a green brick, basically?
Okay, just hold it. We'll take 3 and then we'll deal with them together. Okay. How do you create green brick? And just behind, sorry, there's someone behind who had their hand up.
Thanks. I wanted to ask a very sort of practical question of Ed, but first thinking about the IOE thing and being slightly gold-tinged, obviously from my hand up earlier on. I don't know many people heard it. I never thought I'd hear myself quote James Corden, but he won a Tony Award last night and blethered on about, but the best thing he said was about how important it was to be we and us and not I. He was talking about him and his partner, but I thought that was a good place to start for all the goldies out there. My practical question really, as someone who hasn't had a bank account for over 20 years, my bank is my building society. I don't know enough about what high street banks offer to be able to answer when I say to people, give up your bank account, follow me down the building society route or the cooperative route. I have no idea what banks are seducing people with. You know.
Okay. And just one more from this side, then I'll come to that side. So one more here. Someone put their hand up. The cameraman is desperate for something. I presume it's a question. I don't know, maybe something else.
Yeah, look forward when you
Hi. My question is, you talk about the behaviour change, but there's no talk of actual change in like the financial system of capitalism, which is basically impacting on behaviour. And also, you know, we have actually no control over the money supply because we have a fractional reserve banking system where banks can actually create money. So even if you do move a lot of the money, they can still continue to create money out of thin air. So how do we, you know, these people and organisations are so powerful that I'm not interested in sort of them making me change my behaviour. I want control over resources and stuff which impacts on my life.
Great.
Not behaviour change, if you see what I mean.
That's great. I think we've got enough together. So, first question, how to create a green brick? I think, so that's probably for...
green bricks are brilliant. When a brick takes on a behaviour, they will do it forever. And they will do it accurately and they'll do it properly. Some of the green wedge on the edges occasionally, but well, I'm a green wedge, I really, really care, which means I don't actually have to do all the behaviours. Whereas the brick wedges will actually do them consistently. So once you've got green wedge behaviours, you don't have to do much to maintain them. They are brilliant. The way to create a green brick is to find a locally relevant issue. To find an issue which is as local as possible, as local to the street, because some people are so brick that they don't even necessarily think on the level of a town, a city, or a nation. So people always go, "Oh, let's get national pride." And it's like, for some people, it's actually about their street, their local school, etc. So something which you can find which is very, 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 very local. Something which is extremely action orientated. Bricks do not like sitting around having conversations like this. They do not want to have a massive on-principle argument about what to do. They actually want something practical, tangible and immediate, and preferably something which they can see a change making. It starts sounding pretty good to be a brick wedge, actually, after a while. And it's got to be something where you can prove the success and show the difference that it's made quite quickly. So again, we don't say thank you very often in our movement to people who have taken behaviours. People do something and we go, right, next, that wasn't enough, that wasn't good enough, it didn't make enough of a change. So with the brick wedge, to make sure that if behaviour has been taken, that they thank you. We once did we once did a thanks for recycling campaign, and it made a massive difference.
Thank you, Sonny. 2 questions. What about no idea of what the high street banks do, and this bigger one about sort of monetary policy? I don't know, do you want to try and do something together on that, though, just to give us a bit more chance for just a small challenge?
Yeah, I'll do it briefly. So what was your name? Sorry. Mine. Yes. Francis, thanks very much. You know everything that you need to know in order to be able to talk to people about it, because the truth is that everything that kind of banks do, you can find a building society or a cooperative bank or others to do the same. So it's not a question of functionality. Not all building societies offer current accounts. A minority do. And not all of the ethical banks have got branches all over the country, but some do. Cooperative Bank, does, less so in Scotland, but there's Britannia branches. Nationwide kind of, will do as well. So I think the honest answer is that everything that you can get from your current bank, if it's a mainstream bank, you could get from one of the alternatives. Now we have published a little guide to cooperative and mutual money, which is available through Cooperatives UK or the Move Your Money site. So there is more resources and materials around for those who'd like to do that or kind of go down that path. The smartphone app, I should say, it has a name. It's called Co-operate. We had to agonise over that one, as you can imagine, spent ages getting to it, but we did finally get to that name of Co-operate, and it goes live for download from noon on June the 19th. And if you want to take a takeaway action, if you have a smartphone, then do download it kind of afternoon on June the 19th, because it does push it up the ratings if that takes place. The point about, there are big, I love what you're saying about why should I change my behaviour. It's the behaviour of the big beasts that we need to change, and that's absolutely right. At the same time, I'm hoping you don't bank with RBS or something like that, because you'll find a certain level of dissonance in your own life. So, even alongside that side, I think that for reasons of integrity, to bring yourself into line with institutions that you feel supportive of is right. But to my mind, these are all things that tip over. Ivan Illich talked about tools for conviviality as a way of promoting social change. The idea that things like fair trade, if you just think fair trade is, a better coffee with an ethical halo, then you're missing the bloody point. The point is we live in a world of deep inequalities, and there has to be action at all levels to address those inequalities. Fair trade, which comes from, 3/4 of it, democratically organised cooperatives, is about people trying to reclaim power. But the hope is that fair trade can bring you into a set of conversations about how you live and how we create a world and encourage that kind of corporate behaviour change that can address some of those issues around poverty. Credit creation, absolutely there as well. You've got credit unions in Bristol closely aligned with local currencies and with some of the campaigns in and around that. So I think let's see these as a spectrum, where the kind of what you do individually can be part and parcel of something that I think gets it absolutely right what you say, which is that those who have power need to take responsibility. And in a world where you have a reckless pursuit of short-term gain at costs, environmental and social costs, we need both to look at what we do, but also hold others to account. I kind of fully agree with what you say.
I think the financial world is superbly opaque, I think is one of the great challenges. It's very, very hard to see what is really happening within it. So one of the things you really can do is ask your bank what they are doing with your money. It is your money after all. And there are a few organisations, of which Trudis is one, where transparency is one of the sort of core foundations, and there are others that as we talk about. If you go and ask an RBS or a Barclays what they're doing with the money, they'll A, be astonished, and B, not be able to tell you. And that in itself, I think, is very telling. So there is a way of exercising some control over what is happening to it there. And
the truth is they do listen to money. So actually it's a very powerful message to send to the banks, which is to organise and mobilise to get people to move your money. There is a logic there. You're not going in to persuade them to be kind to injured teddy bears. You're telling them they need to change because people move their accounts somewhere else.
Let's touch this side. So the gentleman in the front here and then straight behind, if that's...
This is a slightly facetious question. We've had the Diamond Jubilee. Next big event is the Olympics. Could you see such a thing as a cooperative Olympics and the values that involves?
Okay, thank you very much. And lady behind, and then we'll go down to the person sort of to you. Yeah. So if you can pass it on to your front and right afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Solitaire about the idea of creating status as a motivator for gold wedge people. I've come across a little bit the work of Common Cause, and it seems to suggest that that's counterproductive because it sort of embeds the kind of values and behaviours that we don't want to embed. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that. And I'd also like to ask Charles if Triodos Bank would consider opening current accounts, please.
Yes. That's great, thank you.
Okay, actually, you've, in a sort of sense, asked my question, but can I just say, there was a lovely little example, I can't remember, somewhere over in Norfolk, of becoming a green brick of a street that organised itself, and they've planted plants all up, and they've got people kind of doing all sorts of things, and when you spoke of what people should do, I thought it was a lovely one of that. So I'll leave my question because it's covered.
Thank you. All right. So let's deal with those two then. Sorry, why don't you deal with yours about the status issue?
So this is a constant argument and conversation. So I don't want to change who people are. I like people. There's a wonderful quote from Alexander Pope, which is the glory and riddle of the world. We are complicated, we care about each other and we care about status. We care about sex and we care about animals. We are these incredibly complex human beings. Some of our buttons that you can press are quite difficult to cut out of us. And status is one of them. Because status, when you get right down to it, is sexual selection. And sexual selection and sex is quite difficult to cut out of us. And sometimes when we start talking about how we want to change people, we start sounding a bit on the religious end, which is actually fine, but we have to be aware of how many people will choose to listen to that and choose won't to. So I have no problem with working with status in order to bring about positive behaviours, because the alternative would be to try to ignore it, pretend it's not there, which means ignoring sexual selection and a huge history of human beings caring about status. So I was reading the Wife of Bath's tale the other day in Chaucer about the £10 of lace she wore on her head every week to show off in church and to try and find her sixth husband. And it was like in Chaucer reading Geordie Shaw. It was, sex and status and competition and consumption in the 14th century. So I have no intention of trying to circumvent, overrule or remove that driver. I intend to use it to bring about positive behaviours.
Thanks. Sorry. Claire, do you want to say anything about status in terms of how it works with your model?
I think you have to go with the flow. I think it's absolutely crucial that we are found acceptable as we are, and we have to go in through the doorway of how we are, and then sort of create an invitation to go deeper. I mean, most people are longing for some sort of meaning in their lives, whether they're actually aware of it or not, and a lot of the status stuff is covering up a lack of that. And helping people to understand why we are the way we are in really accessible ways, so that we can sort of drop through to a deeper level, I think is a way through. It's, fear of being found to be faulty, fear of being shamed, fear of being found less than are really crippling for an awful lot of us, and we don't know what to do with it, so we'll just avoid it completely. Finding a way to ask questions that help us to look at who we are and why we're being the way we're being, that can have us actually recognise, why does, or even think, why does this matter so much to me?
Thank you. Okay, lovely, thank you. Ed, the Co-operative Olympics, next year, I think, isn't it?
Thank you so much. It's a lovely question. And, there is a very positive kind of element. I know that the Olympics have rather been taken over by corporate sponsors and the like, but there is a heritage there of internationalism, of team sports as well, which is one that could be reclaimed. I'm struck by what we've just gone through in terms of the sort of Diamond Jubilee celebrations. There's been an astonishing kind of program of local events right across the country, perhaps the largest, program of voluntary social participation, in modern times. 1.5 million people, 1 million women, 500,000 men were involved in organising local events. And not everybody, went along to them, but actually, an incredible kind of participation that is there. And so maybe, as you say, it's just the imagination to be able to use that spirit and to take, what you're saying, Solly. I don't agree with you, this dichotomy between changing behaviour and changing people. I don't think you can change people, but I think you can change the way, you can change their values, they can change their values, I think they can change their aspirations. And I think anti-racism, kind of gender equality, all of these things are about changing social values and mores. So I accept the boundary. Don't get people to be other than they want. But taking the positive side of what you were saying, yes, let's use fun, let's use sexual selection, let's use all of these kinds of things, in a cooperative model, in a sense that actually can engender, culture. And I think the time for this is now. I feel again that it's more and more clear that government, the governments, so many politicians, economic commentators, do not have the answers and are leading us, kind of blind. Actually, there's an openness, I think, to different ways of doing things. I say in terms of sport. Oh, and on the third one, it's incredible edible Todd Morden. Todd Morden in the kind of Dales, pioneered this. It's a cooperative model. It's one of our members. Pamela Warhurst, who, she's not. I don't think she's a tree sister, Claire, but she would certainly be a kind of broccoli sprout sister. They have taken over Todd Morden and planted, starting with the canal side, edible vegetables and fruit as a way of creating a collective form of action and changing the way that people think about kind of food. And it is a remarkable story. And food is a very live area. Bristol's always been very strong on kind of, local food and politics. There's a lot you can do. So Pamela Warhurst is the woman who's one of the inspirations behind that.
Thank you, Ed. I was told I could go until 7:40, and it's now 7:38 and a half, so I'm afraid we are going to have to draw to a close. But just a couple of things, just say thank you very much to our three speakers, to Claire, to Solitaire, and to Ed for, I think, really great stuff.